Hello everyone and welcome again to another Indie First Impressions video from Randomised Gaming. And as always for these videos, I will be your host for this Indie First Impressions video, Random Gamer Riven. And in today's video we will be looking at Immortal Darkness, Curse of the Pale King, which was developed by Giant Space Monster. And as always, as a quick disclaimer now, I should just say Giant Space Monster kindly provided us the Steam key for us to look at the game. Now, Immortal Darkness Curse of the Pale King is a fantasy live-action RPG, much in the Diablo Zelda style vein, and it's sort of got puzzle elements that remind me historically of Falcom's Ys series, or Ys series as they actually pronounce it, but they spell it Ys for some reason. But I must admit, this has been made by a studio of very experienced game developers. In fact, Giant Space Monster is made up of a number of experienced developers, and when you actually play it, this plays like a true labour of love to both to the live action RPG series and as a game overall. It really is a well made, well put and professionally made title. Probably fair to say this is the most professionally and best made of the indie first impression games I have played and looked at to date. So as I mentioned, Immortal Darkness is very much in the Diablo vein, although just comparing it to Diablo would be a bit of a disservice, because traditionally Diablo has a very nasty habit of just literally throwing monsters at you and not much else. Immortal Darkness is a much more puzzle orientated with how some of the stages and areas are, and they're a lot more interesting than say the original Diablo or even the sequel were in some elements, because you do have to navigate hidden passages. You will find walls you can move aside and you have to push aside statues you can move out of your way to reveal secret paths and routes. There's also plenty of loot to discover as well, and the loot itself is partly random, although the stages themselves are the same. If you play multiple games side by side as I did for capturing purposes, I actually discovered the magic spells and loot items and potions I got in one playthrough was very different to the set I got in another playthrough, which is quite interesting because on one side I got a load of aggressive attacking spells, and on the other playthrough I got much more defensive spells, so that actually had to make me mix up my combat style a little bit. So there is plenty of puzzle navigating. You will have to navigate spiked walls, moving spike platforms. There's also pitfall traps you'll need to avoid, and there's some really nice puzzle elements that you don't really see that much in Diablo. So in that aspect it's much more like Zelda and Famicom's Ys series. Story-wise, after the opening intro, there are a few dialogue between various characters. There's also some really nice lore hidden in the chests as you progress through the game. There is a subtle thing where as you open chests you'll sometimes find notes from previous travellers in the dungeons, and you can read those notes to discover more about the background of the various characters and elements and why things are there, and about the quest of other people to try and defeat the Pale King, and what's really lurking at the bottom of this dungeon as well. There's also a very friendly merchant in this dungeon, surprisingly, who will sell you a whole variety of items, and he is a real blessing at times, especially when you're running low on health potions. As I mentioned, there is a huge selection of items from magic spells, and there's a whole variety of spells from aggressive defensing. I traditionally used to get a fireball spell first off, but on one later on in a lot of the video I had a lightning ball which you could send out to attack players. In another one I actually got the vine spell that some of the wizards used on me, that you could grab the enemies and hold them in place. There's some really great, a blizzard spell as well, so there's a huge variety of spells, and it allows you to really mix up and change how you want to play the game. On top of that you have an absolutely massive selection of potions, from those that boost your attack, your experience, your defense, potions that cause spells effects that damage the enemies on screen, and other potions that reduce your evil level. And the evil level is actually an interesting little system. Basically, as you play a shade who's exploring the dungeon, who's after the Pale King, and basically he's suffered a serious wound and is actually turning into a vampire. Now you can speed up the process of turning into the vampire by basically draining enemies' blood. You can actually do it to heal up. However, you have a evil meter, and should that meter get to 100, then unfortunately poor Shade will turn into a vampire and it's game over. So you can actually exploit the system tactically by using their shrines that reduce your evil level and potions, and you can deliberately use it if you want to heal up occasionally just to drink the blood of your enemies, but just make sure not to drink too much because otherwise it will be game over. Each level is unique, and actually, as I said, it's pre-designed. So the first level and the second level, when I played on 2 different accounts, were identical to one another, but they're very well thought out, very well planned dungeons, and in necessary I sometimes prefer these type of pre-planned dungeons to the random ones you saw in Diablo, because the random ones you see in Diablo aren't that interesting as such. There aren't that many, there's sort of preset hidden things, but not a huge amount, whereas in here you've got much more intricate design stages because they can actually sit there and apply the level design. So I do actually prefer the dungeons in this. One thing I will say is basically this is a game, in some ways, although this is like a live action RPG, it is a forward going stage game. Once you clear one dungeon stage, you can't go back to the next. There's no sort of surface village like in Diablo. You can't return to the surface of the dungeon, you just keep going down, and once you've cleared a stage you can't go back. So when you're at the end of a stage, make sure you've fully explored it before going down to the next stage. Now, I will actually say about the very nice art style that's used. It's a slightly cutesy style, as you see from the intro, and initially I wasn't too sure whether I was going to like it, but the more I saw it, the more I thought, actually, I really enjoy the system. It's really well put together. It's a very bright, it's kind of weird, it's a little bit contrasting compared to what you expect for a sort of dungeon game, where you have these slightly cutesy looking characters to some degree, but it's a very memorable style, and I actually think it works really well. It certainly cuts out Immortal Darkness, Curse of the King from other games, because I can instantly think of the art style, and that's something that's always very good. It's something like games like Borderlands, when you think of it, the art style comes into your head straight away, whereas games like Gears of War, which use a very generic art style, are very, very forgettable, whereas this game does also use a very unique style, and that actually works really well. It complements it. The dungeons are very dark and misty, although they do change as you go down, so you do get different colouring styles as you go further into the dungeon, which is all very well and nicely done and planned, and the lighting and everything works really well. To complement the lovely art style, you have a whole variety of sound effects and music as well, and the music is again very sort of classical themed stuff with the sort of very subtly done in the background. It's actually quite enjoyable to listen to, and while perhaps I wish it was a bit more to the forefront, it's quite sort of dimmed away in the back of the soundtrack. You can hear it, and it is very nice music to actually sit back, relax, and listen. You do feel there is a certain tension there as you progress into the dungeon, because there's a sense of unknown, and I do think the music gets that across. There's also a sense of mystery at some bits, meet certain characters and encounters, and I think the music comes across really well in that. So the combat itself is live action. Basically, it's all done with the mouse. You left click to use your sword, and you right click to drink the blood of your enemies. Very straightforward, but of course you have a huge variety of spells and potions to use. There are quick keys, so you can quickly use 3 items. You do have a backpack as well, but using the backpack in combat can be a little bit tricky, but basically you put reserve items in your backpack, and the quick items you want to use quickly in the quick keys. You also have the spells, and you have the 6 quick buttons for the first 6 spells that you want to use, and you will literally, as I find, I'm clicking moving shade and literally throwing every spell at every enemy I can. Now, one thing is the combat is very tactically done, so just running into a batch of enemies, especially when you've got like a couple of knights and a magician, will get you killed very, very quickly. So you need to plan ahead. You need to make sure you use the right spells to preload the enemies, so you can either put on shields and defensive magic before you go in, or use tactics like the Vine magic spell to grab one enemy to keep him out of the way, or stun another, or attack the enemy in a group with a spell. Or another subtle tactic that I tend to do is lure them away in small groups at the time, or get them in a position where you can use the magic on them without too much damage. If the enemy surrounds you, you will be killed very quickly, so just rushing into combat is not a bright idea, especially if there's a couple of mages. Another point is magic spells do hurt the enemies as well, so if you can get a mage behind an enemy when they cast the spell, it will hit the enemy instead of you, so that's another tactic you can employ. But certainly you do need to plan out how you're going to fight various enemies. Knights you can just go in for close combat, but mages you need to be aware of, and you do need to keep an eye out when you have a group of enemies, because the magic users will try and blast you with the magic while the knights get stuck in, and that can be a very tricky situation to deal with if you don't plan ahead. And there's not just vampires down here, there are a horde of other nasty minions. And while perhaps I think the opening stage could have done with an additional monster or two, like maybe like a light easy slime or something like a little vampire bat, while admittedly those type of enemies may appear later on, I just felt the initial stage, just the knights and the mages, felt like there should have been 1 or 2 other monsters, maybe something to try and knock you off some of the platforms when you're riding around on them. But I just felt this should have been like a really light fodder enemy. The knights take a few hits where it's just like a little slime or something that you can whack away in one hit. But just to serve as sort of introduction enemy. That was the one thing I felt missing. But aside from that perspective, I have very, very few complaints at all with this game. It is very, very well done, and I've really enjoyed my time with it. Of course, one last thing I should mention is there are plenty of bosses as well in the dungeons as you go deeper down. As you can see here, this is the first boss in the game, and he doesn't like you visiting the temple, that's for sure. So there's a whole range of enemies you will be facing across the course of your adventure. Will ultimately Shade get to return back to normal? Will he defeat the Pale King? Well, that's for up to you to discover, and I have to question, will the Pale King be the final boss, or is there something really meaner and deeper and darker lurking in the temple and dungeons below? Really, really well put together game, and I have to admit, this is probably the best of the games I've actually looked at for the indie first impressions. This really is professionally well made. This really deserves a lot of love and support. So if you are watching this video, do have a look at Immortal Darkness Curse of the Pale King. It is $15.49 at the minute on Steam. You'll have to check in the real relevant regions for the relevant prices, but I assume that's probably around $20. I think that's quite a good price for what is a very meaty, very replayable title that is very professionally put together. I really can't fault this game. It feels like this is like an old school game. It feels like a real love letter to the genre. It feels like it's made by developers who have unshackled by publishing restraints and have just gone out and made a real love letter. As I should mention, they are actually still updating Immortal Darkness Curse of the Pale King, and there have been a few patches already that have added in some additional features. I know the recent patch added in a campfire bonus item and a new hidden room, so do keep an eye out that. There is some updates still coming, and of course, as always, the updates may change the game over this initial impressions video. It may be have even more additional content if you watch this video a year down the line. But overall, Immortal Darkness Curse of the Kings is fantastic, and if you like Diablo, if you like Zelda, if you like Ys, if you like any sort of live action adventure dungeon crawler, then this is up your street. If you enjoy RPG games, and if you're waiting for Diablo 4 and want to play something that's Diablo-like while you're waiting for Diablo 4, do have a look at this. This is a fantastic game. I cannot praise it enough, and full credit to Giant Space Monsters. This is absolutely fantastic. So that's my thoughts on Immortal Darkness Curse of the Pale King. All that leaves me to say is thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please do hit that like button. I'll include various links to Giant Space Monsters website and the Steam store for Immortal Darkness Curse of the King. And as always, of course, if you like our content, please do subscribe to the channel. And thank you for watching.